Great to be with you for week 3 of our learning group regarding our discussion about men and women who are part of the LGBT community and our direction as a church toward full inclusion. I want to say that week 1 we began by saying that we were going to approach this conversation in a dignified and thoughtful way. And one of the things that I know has been really encouraging for us in leadership is that we have experienced that from you, and it's not been surprising, quite honestly. It's what we expected from all of you. That even in your questions, even in places of disagreement, what we've seen is a lot of grace and a lot of love and a lot of thoughtfulness and a lot of dignity. So thank you for that. I'm going to pray and then kind of set up our evening and introduce our guests, and then we'll get on with it. God, we come to you alongside one another tonight. God, we thank you that we are already experiencing and contributing to the unity that we were invited into by you, the unity of which Jesus spoke, so that the world would know that you sent your Son and that you love us. And so for those who've given this time tonight and this time over the last 2 weeks and time in thought and prayer and discussion, we say thank you. We thank you for our friends, our guests who are with us here tonight to share with us so that we may continue to learn more. We pray these things and commit this time to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, so tonight we have 5 friends with us, and these are men and women who either are a part of our faith community here at Denver Community Church or spent time with our elder team speaking to us over the last 18 months and sharing with us and helping us see what we may not be able to see on our own and giving us experiences and allowing us to ask questions that we may not otherwise have asked. And so I want to introduce to you Jenny Morgan, Eric Beach, Paula Williams, Scott Kingery, and Roger Jones. I want to invite them up to the platform. You can welcome them up. And they'll talk a little bit more about who they are, where they're from, but we want to give them as much time as possible tonight. And then when they're done sharing, John Gettings is going to moderate a time of question and response. One of the things that we tried last week was 3x5 cards, and we did that so we could get to more questions than we did the first time. But one of the things we didn't like is it felt like it cut us off from you and you from us. And so we're going to go back to a live time of question and response. And if you are unable to have your question answered, we would ask that you do write it on the 3x5 card, because we will continue to respond to those through email throughout the week. So without any further ado, Jenny Morgan.
Thank you. Well, good evening. I'm from Highlands Church, and we live in Highlands of Denver, and I'm one of the co-pastors there at Highlands Church. I've been on our staff there for just under 7 years, and we're just under 8 years old, so we're a relatively young church. And we've always been what we would call open and inclusive, affirming to LGBTQ people. And so our community is very excited that you're on this journey. And this past week, we had a chance to announce your decision to move along in this process. And so I bring greetings, good tidings from Highlands Church, and a whole packet of hundreds of notes from our kids and our teenagers and our people. And I'm going to just leave this here for you guys, except that I would like to start by reading 3 of these notes to you. One says, "Hey DCC, congratulations on becoming a more inclusive entity. We're proud of you all for your courage. I'm inspired by it." Someone else from our children's ministry, who needed to add some glitter, said, "You are brave, you are strong, you are you, and that's what you should be." And then a 16-year-old from our community who has two dads who have been together for 21 years. Brant is 16, and Brant says, "Your decision of inclusiveness helps the world more in the direction it should. Keep doing you, Brant." So we want to encourage you from Highlands Church to keep doing and being you. And we want you to know that all along in your process, even up to this point, We have felt like a sister church to you, and we hope that that just deepens as the conversation deepens. I want to tell you about my mom and dad's reaction to me being gay. That's where I'd like to start. And I came out as gay about 13 years ago after spending 25 years of my life trying to get healed from being gay. And I honestly thought that's what God wanted me to do, was get healed from being gay. Like, I was broken, and what God does is heal us. So I really thought that's what God would do in my life, and I prayed for that and spent $50,000 on counseling to move in that direction. I was very involved in Exodus and all sorts of other, what we now call ex-gay ministries, and none of them harmed me in any way. All of my time in those organizations deepened my relationship with Jesus, helped me to be less deceptive and live less in hiding, but none of that work helped me to get healed from being gay. And so I had been hiding from my family. I grew up in a blue-collar family, fairly uneducated, a wonderful family, a broken family, but they had no category for gay. And I was really afraid to tell my parents, and so I just hid it for years, partly because I'd been trying to get healed from something, so I didn't feel like I should own something that I was trying to put behind me. When I finally told my dad's response was, "Oh, honey, I knew." Dang, I didn't hide it as well as I thought. And then Dad said, "But what about Sodom and Gomorrah?" And my dad's question was really innocent. He had never really read the Bible. He was a good Catholic, but didn't really study the Bible like we evangelicals like to do. He was asking a question about whether or not I was okay with God. So we talked for 10 minutes about Sodom and Gomorrah, and then he said, "You know what? If you're okay with this and God is okay with this, I'm fine with this." And when my dad finally met my partner, Christy, who is my partner, there weren't even any questions, because my dad wasn't facing an issue. He was facing two people, one of whom he adored and would want to support me no matter what I was doing. So my dad died 5 years ago now, and I am so grateful that I told him before he died, so that he could know me for real, and so that he would experience the Jenny that wasn't hiding. When I told my mom, my folks have been divorced for many years, and my mom had gone from being a really wounded Catholic to being a really strong evangelical. And she goes to a beautiful Bible church in Pittsburgh, where I'm from. So when I told her, her response was, "Of course I love you, of course I'm going to accept you, but does this mean that I have to choose between the Bible and you?" And that's a hard question for me to wrestle with my mom, because I'm as committed to the Bible as my mom is, right? And I don't want her to think she's got to choose either me or the Bible. And so it didn't take her any longer, but she really did think that was the choice she had to make. And the way she resolved the choice in her mind was, if I do have to choose between my daughter, whom I adore, and the Bible, I'm going to choose my daughter, because I think that's what God would want me to do. So that's how my mom resolved it. And my mom, this is now 13 years later in the present, my mom attends this same Bible-believing evangelical church. It's called South Hills Bible Church. And it's a great church. I probably agree with them theologically 75%. But she's in hiding. She can't tell anybody that she's got a gay daughter. A gay daughter, right, who's a pastor in a church. A gay daughter who has her degree from Fuller Seminary and Trinity Seminary, same as her pastors. She can't talk about it. She's afraid that they will kick her out if they know that she chose me over the Bible. Now, I don't think they would kick her out, right? But my mom's afraid. She can't afford to lose her faith community, which is what most of us feel like. And my mom is at a stage in her life where she's physically very frail. She has a lot of difficulties physically. Somebody comes from her church every single week and picks her up, takes her to church, and somebody else from her Sunday school class brings her home 52 weeks a year. They love her, and they are so beautifully expressing the body of Christ for my mom. I don't want her to tell them because she needs the body of Christ so much. So my mom is in hiding, and it's hard for her. I tell her, as does my partner, Christy, we don't care. We want you to get the benefit of the loving Christian family that you have, and if that means you have to be in hiding, then you stay in hiding. But boy, do I wish she went to a church like this, where she could talk about her journey and not wanting to sacrifice the Bible, but not being able to reject her daughter. But she's in a church where she just can't talk about it. So both of my parents were able to not only accept me, but embrace me and continue to feel proud of me, even though I had spent 25 years lying to them and pretending like I was someone that I really wasn't. So those 25 years of hiding and trying to get healed, the entire time, I heard the voice of God saying to me, Jenny, I love you. And, not but, and you have to stop lying. Like that was God's message to me that whole time. I love you, and you just gotta stop lying. You gotta stop being deceptive. So it took me 25 years to recognize that God all along wanted me to trust him and depend on him and live my life with him and for him. But I had been asking God the wrong question. For me, and in my life, I had been begging God to heal me, to change me, to either help me be celibate or take it away. And I think God wanted me to ask a different question. So about 14 years ago, I started saying, could you bring me someone that I could love? Could you bring a woman into my life? And it was soon after that I met Christy, who is my partner now of 11 years. And I think God brought us together. Like, I think we didn't try to find each other. Like, I really think it was the Holy Spirit that brought us together and enabled us to form the kind of partnership that we have. I call her my partner, not my wife. A lot of gay women use that term. The two of us aren't comfortable with that. She's my partner. We're not married, but we're in a committed, monogamous, lifelong relationship that looks very much like healthy marriages that I see. And our commitment is to each other, but our commitment circles around a community of faith that we live in, and our two families, and most importantly, our relationships with God, our connection to Jesus Christ. And we are really boring gay women. I don't know how many gay people you know, but we're boring on the scale of what gay people are like. I think we're boring when it comes to heterosexuals too. For example, when I go home tonight, my boring partner and I will have a cup of tea and watch an episode of Doctor Who. Any fans? Like, okay. Always at the soundboard. Always at the soundboard, Doctor Who. And we'll go to bed at 10:15, and we'll be asleep by 10:30. I mean, we're boring, really, and we are so grateful. Like, we don't, for any moment, forget how blessed we are that we have each other. Because I'm a better pastor because I'm partnered to somebody. She's a better businesswoman because she's partnered to somebody. We give more back to the world and for the sake of the gospel because we're together than we could ever do on our own. I'm not sure what my life would be like if I didn't have her. And I intend to be committed to her for the rest of my life. And I'm so grateful that I have that. Not everybody has that. I know that. I wanted to end by just saying, like, I've only shared the tip of the iceberg, right? Like, all of us are so complex as human beings. God made us complex, partly because God is so complex and we were made in God's image. And I have a whole long list of identities that I could talk to you about. I have a musical identity that's way more exciting than my gay identity. I have a theological identity and an educational identity and a socioeconomic identity and a family identity. And I'm a really complex set of identities. And I think I just want you to know the non-negotiable, most important identity I have is that I am a beloved daughter of God. And I got there because Jesus Christ found me. And that part of my identity, I would rather talk to you about than the fact that I'm gay, the sort of boring part of my identity. But I am gay, and it is part of the identity that I have as the beloved daughter of God, as the child of God. So I appreciate you listening, but even more than that, I appreciate that you're in the world because my mom could find a place here because of the way that you're doing this work. So thank you.
Well, my name is Roger Jones, and first of all, I'm just really grateful that we all get a chance to share our stories. I think there's really, this phrase I keep hearing is like the danger of a single story. I don't know where that originated, but it's like when you hear one perspective, it's easy to transpose that onto everyone else who might be in this situation, part of the LGBTQ community. So I'm glad we get to hear from 5 of us. And there's a lot more than 5 stories, too. So just keep that in mind. So as I said, I'm Roger. I work with a ministry here in Denver called Where Grace Abounds. And one among the issues we work with, one of those is people who are gay and maybe feeling some conflict about that because of their faith. And that is, that's how I found my way to Where Grace Abounds in Denver. Going back a little bit, I grew up in a small town in West Texas, so that's not bad enough. I was also, confused about my sexual orientation and also, some gender confusion early on. I mean, it's just not a very easy place to be questioning some of those things. Small town anywhere, really, I think, but my faith was really important to me. It was a huge part of my upbringing, and my family was we weren't casual Christians. We were in church every time that the doors were open. In fact, my parents had the key. They were often the ones opening and locking up, and just serving in all kinds of ways. And it wasn't just going through the motions. It really mattered, and it was really heartfelt and deep, not just for them, but for me as well. And, I think growing up in that environment, it never occurred to me until later that, maybe what I'm understanding the Bible to say about homosexuality, maybe God didn't mean that, or there might be a different way to look at that. It just wasn't even part of the paradigm for me. It's just like, this is what I think the Bible says, this is what I'm told the Bible says, so it must be true. And so that really caused a lot of inner turmoil for me to be in this place of feeling like I'm something that is not acceptable. I prayed and prayed and prayed, much like I think you probably did, much probably like all of us here have at some level. And I was not experiencing what I thought should happen about that God would change me from gay to straight. And because that wasn't happening, that really took a hit on my view of myself. I must be unacceptable to God. I'm not doing it right, perhaps. I'm not praying the right way. I'm not praying hard enough. Or I'm not a Christian to begin with, and God has set me aside. So that was really a lot of years of a very painful experience with that. And I think because of that, it really kind of set the stage of a double life of sorts for me, where I could be the good Christian kid that everybody saw, and in my secret private life, I have all this stuff going on in my head, and addiction to pornography building, and that was not healthy or helpful. And so it was I was in college when I first found out about a ministry called Where Grace Abounds, where I'm working now, and decided that this is a big enough deal in my life that I want to go check it out. So I dropped out of college in Texas and moved to Denver. And my goal was to become straight and normal. That was the elusive normal is what I wanted. And I don't know that anybody feels normal, but that's what I desperately wanted and felt like I needed. And I was tired of feeling different and being told how different I was all the time. It was, I was the target of being bullied and teased for a lot of years. And I was convinced that if I could just be straight and I could get married and have a family, everything would be better. That was the goal to happiness. So what I didn't expect to find when I got here was a community and acceptance just kind of where I was. And I could show up with my whole self. I didn't have to hide the fact that I was gay. I didn't have to hide the fact that I was a Christian. I could bring both of those things to the table. In fact, that was sort of the membership card, was having those two things. Those were the things that brought the acceptance. And I'd never experienced that before. And I would even say, even with within my family, my parents and my family love me very much, but I just never felt like a whole being with them. And so that was huge. And I will say that I think Denver is just a lot more accepting place than small town West Texas. So I'm sure, if in Texas, if you have a little bit of a swish in your walk, you're a faggot, immediately. And I had more than a little bit of a swish. I don't get singled out here the way I did there. So, I think one of the first challenges that I really had to face when once I finally was admitting that this is something I need to face. It's not a phase I'm going through. It's not going to just go away on its own. I really had to face, well, why do I want to be normal, whatever that means? Why is marriage a goal that will bring acceptance to me? And do I really want, at what cost am I willing to have those things? And I started to realize through that process that normal and marriage and family were really idols in my life that I needed to get rid of. And while that was hard, and normal and marriage are not bad things. So for me, I think that they were at the expense of maybe what God was asking me to do. And I did know all along that if I was going to be married and have a family, I didn't want that to be pretend. I wanted it to be for real. And so I let go of that. And that was a much needed thing to let go of. And, the other reality I had to face is that, if God is God, and he really is God, he could change my sexual orientation. And yet, I didn't see it happening. I didn't see it happening in the way I thought it should, at least, or what I thought it would look like for people. And that was a big disappointment and very disheartening to have to kind of face that reality of like, okay, so what does that mean? And I really think that led me into a deeper place of struggle and wrestling with Scripture and what I think God was trying to, my understanding of what God's saying about sexuality and gender and all those things. And while I found a lot of compelling arguments about same-sex attraction and same-sex marriage being acceptable, I didn't find any that were convincing to me. And then again, that's just for me. So I want to reiterate that. This is me and my journey. But so marriage and family are not a goal any longer. Being in a gay relationship didn't really feel like an option that was compatible for me and my faith and where I was at. So I started to settle into, well, what is this celibate Christian thing? What does that mean? And first of all, I got to say, celibate is like a really depressing word, I think. It's very monastic and serious. And so I don't think I ever really owned that word for myself just because of that. So I sort of moved forward into, well, what is just being a single Christian person? What is that going to mean for me? And that was, how can I do that and have a fulfilling life? And it was through that I found that, life could be really good as a single person. And, you get to a point in life where it's really hard in your 20s when everybody's getting married that's your age. But you get into your 30s and it's a little easier because there's still people getting married. Sometimes it's not their first one then, and that raises a whole other set of issues. But I just found that life was really good, and I had some really solid friendships. I wasn't lonely in the way that I was afraid that singleness was going to mean, and it's, like, as I said, it was really good, and I had a lot of great friendships. And fast forward about 10 years, one of those friendships was with a female, and it started to feel like more than a friendship. And I didn't know what to do with that because it didn't fit my new paradigm of singleness and the life that I was trying to move forward in. And, to be fair, it wasn't like that happened overnight. There was always something different about that relationship, but I just didn't know how to work it out. I couldn't figure it out. It didn't fit. Let's just put that to the side. And, there were attractions there. They were not like my attractions towards men. They were different, and sexual attraction became part of it, but it came much later, so I wasn't sure what to make of that. We both were confused, and it was confusing for both of us. We tried dating once, and that was a disaster, and it became apparent that, I think some of my sexual orientation was a factor and will always be in our relationship. But I don't think that was the primary thing going on that was a problem for us. We both had issues going on, and it didn't work. So fast forward a few more years, our friendship, we've kind of worked a little bit to rebuild that. We're not dating anymore. It's really weird when you stop dating a friend and try to be friends again. But it just sort of started again. The feelings came back. We eventually started dating, and things have just seemed to be working so far. We got married in 2010. We have a little girl who's 3.5 and a little 7-month-old. So it's not like this has been free of complications. And I think there are more before us, and it feels good in the way that singleness phase of my life felt. So I love my family. I love my wife. I am also aware of many people who have been in my situation who've been married and they no longer are, and that's painful. And it's not like they entered into marriage with the expectation that would end or the hope. So I try to hold that carefully. I want to, it's a life I didn't expect, and I feel blessed by that, and I want to do my best to maintain it. So I know that, in marriage, I think sort of the problem that happens a lot of times in any marriage is that we sort of turn to that person to be our meter of all our needs. And I have a specific set of needs that I don't think my wife can meet, and that is because of her gender. So I have to do my work to keep my cup full of connection with men, And so I think everybody needs that. Just my cup might be a little emptier most of the time, or I have to work harder at that. So that's my story. I'll wrap up.
So I was a very successful, well-educated white American male. I was the CEO of a large Christian ministry. I was on the regular preaching team of 2 different megachurches, one in Boulder County, Colorado, one in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I've preached in 3 of the 12 largest churches in the United States. I was a weekly columnist for a Christian leadership magazine. I taught in 3 different seminaries. I was comfortable. Did you ever notice God has this habit of afflicting the comfortable? God comforts the afflicted. God afflicts the comfortable. Thomas Merton said it's a terrible thing to climb to the top of a ladder of success, only to realize when you get to the top that your ladder's been leaning against the wrong wall. I knew from the time I was 3 or 4 years of age that I was transgender. In my naivete, I thought I got to choose. I thought before I would start kindergarten, a gender fairy would arrive and say, "Today's the day." I knew what I would choose. That's what I was, a girl. Unfortunately, no gender fairy arrived. And I started school, kindergarten, as a boy, a tall boy at that, not happy at all about that. Why didn't I talk to my parents? That's a fine question. My father was a fundamentalist pastor. My mother was even more conservative. So I just lived my life as a boy. I didn't hate being a boy. I just knew I wasn't one. I got to high school, I was attracted to girls. I dated girls, except it would get complicated because I would want to date a girl, I would want to be the girl I was dating. I got a job as a disc jockey at a large commercial radio station. Actually, I thought every 16-year-old got a job as a disc jockey at a commercial radio station. I had no idea how tilted our culture is in favor of white American males. But that's a different conversation. But because I had that job, I ended up with a scholarship offer to a state university in broadcasting, but I did not take that offer because then I would have to deal with this. So instead, I went to a Bible college because I knew there I could be cured of my issue. There I found a girl that I wanted to date and did not want to be. I married her. We had 3 kids. I loved being a father. My kids still call me Dad, which is confusing to people because they'll say, "Well, I was talking to my dad, and she said," it's just kind of confusing. But then the kids left home, and my gender dysphoria came back with a vengeance. That's what it's called, technically, in the DSM-5, gender dysphoria. It doesn't affect very much of the population, only 0.3% of us. That's why a lot of you have never met someone who's transgender, or maybe even heard of it until the last couple of years. And the truth is, we do not know what causes it. We know what does not cause it. Bad parenting does not cause it. We also know it's not likely genetic. We do know it's prenatal, and we know when it happens. We don't know how it happens. In the very first trimester, our bodies are created, and then half of us get an androgen wash, half of us don't. So we become male or female. But it's not until the 3rd trimester that our brain develops its connection to the body that's been created. And we know that something in the 2nd trimester happens that causes the brain to never make a connection to the body that exists. So that body is experienced as a foreign object. We don't know the specifics. We do know that women who took DES to stop from having miscarriages, which was given commonly between 1930 and 1970, we know that their sons are 30 times, not 30%, 30 times more likely to be transgender than the population at large. My mother took DES, so we know the reasons in my case. Still, I thought that I would be able to get through my life without exploding my family's narrative. That's what I wanted so badly, but unfortunately, if you have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, for most of us, it gets worse with the passing of time, not better. But then came that day I was watching my favorite television show of all time, Lost. Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse were the showrunners. Brilliant. It was the final season. The protagonist of the show, Jack, if you were a Lost fan, comes to the point where he realizes he's been called by God to die. And at that moment, I knew I had been called to transition. And I screamed and yelled at God all night long, all the way to dawn. Who the do you think you are to have made me this way? Don't you know what's going to happen? Don't you know what my family's going to go through? Don't you know I'm going to lose everything? Who do you think you are to have made me this way? But I knew I'd been called. And you reject the call of God at your own peril. You know, the first half of life, we're busy building what Richard Rohr calls resume virtues. We're building kingdoms and amassing fortunes and slaying dragons. But then there comes that time when that just doesn't work anymore. And you begin working instead on eulogy virtues. You find you're no longer looking outside yourself for your sense of satisfaction, but you're looking deep inside your own soul. You find you have fewer friends, but deeper friendships. You find you're not nearly as concerned about being right as you are about being in relationship. And you come to realize that if you've been called by God, you have to answer that call. So I told all the organizations of which I was a part that I was transgender. I was the CEO of a church planting organization I had been with for 35 years. I'd taken their budget from $167,000 to $4 million. I was gone in 7 days. I was gone from every single position I had in 7 days. In 21 states, you have legal rights if you're transgender. You can't be fired. But in all 50 states, if you work for a religious organization, you can be fired for being LGBTQ. So I lost all of it. The day I came out on my blog, by the way, is paulastonewilliams.com, so that's my middle name with it, paulastonewilliams.com. The day I came out on my blog, there were 65,000 page views, and most of those people were really, really pissed. Angry evangelicals. It was not nice what they said, what they did. I lost almost all of my Christian friends, almost every last one of them. How many non-Christian friends did I lose? None. You just have to make of that what you will. None. But I knew I was done with the church. That was it. It was over. Until somebody introduced me to Mark Tidd, founding pastor of Highlands Church. That first Sunday, I cried, oh my goodness. My best friend brought communion back to me. And I knew again I'd been called back to the church. And my family were like, have you not really paid attention to what the church has done to you? I said, yeah, but this one's different. And it is. Within about 3 months, I was preaching there. I preached there occasionally. Mark, Jenny, Rachel, our co-pastors, they are amazing leaders. It's not an overstatement to say that if it wasn't for Highlands Church, I might not be alive. That's probably the biggest, most remarkable thing that happens when you make this decision. There are people who, because of this decision, won't die. And so now I have a bright, good future, being true to myself. So as I was thinking about you, I was thinking about my favorite poet's Mary Oliver, and my favorite poem, I go back and forth. This year, my favorite poem of hers is The Journey. And it really fits you as a congregation right now. It goes like this. One day you knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. One day you knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble And you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. Mend my life. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Though the wind pried at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible, it was already late enough. Late enough in a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, I love that. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, a new voice, a new voice, a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Thanks.
My name is Scott Kingery, and I work with Roger at Where Grace Abounds. And I've worked there. I came in, it was founded in 1986. I came in 1987. I started working there in 1992, so it's been a long time. And as Roger said, you know, what we try to do is, it's not a program, it's really creating an environment, creating a community for people who are in conflict, and mostly with these huge things of our sexuality and our faith, complex things, and need an environment to flail around in and try to figure all of this out. So I just really want to say I really appreciate the vulnerability of the stories tonight. And I also wanted to start with just really thanking DCC, because Raj and I came about a year and a half ago when they were, you know, doing this 2-year journey for them, and we just got to come and share our stories and, you know, what we do at the ministry. And, you know, they spent several hours with us. This wasn't just checking us off the list, and but I think we just left feeling very heard and seen, and so I just really appreciated that time, and just thinking, like, you know, when we got this email, just my mind's been rolling for like weeks. Like, what do you want to talk about with this 15 minutes that you have? And I think I want to talk about that really deep conflict and try to put some words to that, because I think it's really hard to describe. You know, on the one hand, I was really struggling with gender dysphoria at a very early age, and with my sexuality in a lot of ways. And I felt like I was starting kind of in the negative, you know, like my friends, heterosexual friends, were moving into their lives, and they were struggling in some ways, but I just felt like my attractions as they were developing, and it was towards the same gender, were just like bad and wrong. Those are the messages that I heard around. So I felt like I'm already starting like at a -10 or something. And that was really hard. So it was very painful, and feeling also that I was in a minority. You know, like not a lot of people are experiencing this. And it was a very internal, sort of private journey, trying to figure out what's going on with my life and why is this happening. So just, and as Roger said, being very labeled, bullied, rejected, and so just a lot of pain in that area. And then you add Christianity on top of that. And, you know, it's already a complex issue. And now there's more shame. Words like abomination are getting attached to the things that I'm feeling, that I'm hearing, you know, in the midst of sermons and things. And so, of course, you know, I'm asking questions like the same thing, like, does God love me? Am I even worthy of his love? I'm not hearing that. So just conflict once again, at the core places of who we are. I'm a sexual person, I'm a spiritual person, and both of these are in conflict at the deepest core of who I am. And I often hear when I talk to people that that's what they live with, is this really, you're just carrying around this conflict every day, all day long. And so at the core, just in our humanity, we're just feeling this really core seasons of pain, and within our gender and our sexuality and our faith. And that's, there's just not a lot of easy answers that, at a snap of a finger. So, a little more of my experience. I didn't last in the church very long with all of that going on. I left. I was living in the LGBTQ community. I think it was just the G community because it was the 80s. Yeah, so, we've come a long way. So it was just G. But, I really had embraced that identity as a gay man. I came out and felt very much, the 80s were a season of, activism, like the 70s and the 80s and 90s. And I was right on board with all of that, rightfully so. And then suddenly had this reconversion experience, and Jesus came back into my life in a real and very powerful way. And so suddenly I was like, wow, I think I have to put that question back on the table about my sexuality. At least I'm going to put it on the table and at least be open and ask about this, like I was conflicted again. And so as I began asking, I'll just say that my boyfriend at the time wasn't really thrilled with my recent conversion to Christianity. And my friends weren't really very thrilled either. So that didn't go over really well. And as I continued just to ask those questions, I really lost my community of gay friends. And that was really hard. That was a lot of loss when I really didn't have anything else. I wasn't necessarily connected to the Christian community. That was very scary to me. So there was just this really season where it just felt like it was sort of me and the Lord at the time. So I guess I could kind of say that I've been on all sides of this issue when it comes to faith and sexuality. I felt like I've lived on all sides. I've left the church. I felt very wounded by the church. I came back to Jesus. I loved Jesus, but I wasn't too sure about his people at the time. I explored the theology. I worked through a lot of wounds within the context of my family and growing up. I continued to work on that big question, like, who am I? And realizing that, what was really resonating with me was just that very traditional sexual ethic of the Bible. Like, that just felt like just feels like at a core, and that was sort of confused at the time because I don't know exactly what to do with that or how to walk that out. But I just couldn't get away, at least what Jesus or what the Bible was saying to me personally about that. I just want to kind of mention really quickly this friend group that Roger and I are really fortunate to have. And I think we all sort of started in that same place. We were all living with this huge conflict around our faith and our sexuality, deep places of conflict, and our relationship with God was very important. And I think we all at least initially started in that same place of believing sort of this traditional sexual ethic about what the Bible says. We were all there. We were battling shame and our wounds. We were working on those issues and just looking at our lives. So we've known each other for decades, and I think what has happened is as we've all resolved, the way that we've been resolving that conflict for us has sort of put us all on this spectrum. And some of the ways that people have resolved that conflict is they've embraced that gay identity. They've embraced a gay affirming theology. Some of my friends go to Highlands, which I'm really grateful that they have an environment like that. Others of us, we're sort of walking the celibate thing out. And as Roger said, it is a sort of a dismal word, isn't it? And I wouldn't say to any 18-year-old, like, hey, enjoy the next 80 years of celibacy, That's awful, But it really is, just sort of this thing. For us, that's resolving the conflict for us, is to live our lives like that. And And then there are friends of ours that have, gotten married and have had kids, and so it's just really, some of my, like I said, my gay friends are engaged. There might be weddings coming up soon, and I'm very grateful. We also have, heterosexual couples and men and women in our friend group, and so we have shared life together. We have births and we have deaths, and we ring in New Year's together, and we celebrate birthdays, and we have really painful conversations occasionally, and we've had times of strain in our relationships because when you have one group of people that are embracing it and one group that are not embracing it, that sort of sets up the opportunity for conflict, right? And we can really invalidate one another's stories if we let it. Or we can vilify. I just feel like we're in a culture right now that just vilifies anybody that has a different worldview or opinion. It's just so easy to go there. And we have to work really hard. We've had to really fight for our friendships and fight for our relationships and to really honor each other's journeys. And I'm so grateful about that we have these friends that we're all walking this out and trusting God. And I just was thinking about that song, that they'll know we're Christians by the love that we have for one another. And that God's heart is a reconciling heart. That's who God is. So I'm very grateful for that. And I just wanted to say, kind of to end, was I've appreciated the fact that the DCC board is really split on this issue, and they're working hard to move forward with that. My church, when we were talking about this issue, we realized, wow, we are all really split on this issue too. And as I heard everybody talking, I started realizing everyone's talking very passionately and protectively about friends that they had, family members. And I started realizing, we're talking about a lot of different groups of people. We're talking about the LGBTQ community. We're talking about gay Christians, and that's nuanced by side A and side B. We're talking about people that experience same-sex attraction, and for whatever myriad of reasons they can't embrace that identity or the expression of that. And then we have, which is very sad to me, some of my friends are in that really wounded category where they're de-churched and they've left the church and they've left their faith. And I thought, we're talking about a lot of different people here, and that all those needs of those people are very different. And to love and care for them is going to look very differently. And as a church, could we offer pastoral care to every one of those groups of people, not leave any of them out? Could we care for every one of those people? And that's the spirit that I hear when I hear Michael talking, when I've had coffee with him. I hear that spirit of offering pastoral care to everybody and wanting to be inclusive. And I just wanted to say I appreciate that, even though we can have our differences as far as where we land scripturally or whatever. But, I just pray like our friend group would be just like that we could fight for those relationships and fight for those, So I'm going to end and let Eric wrap us up.
So I'm going to read my story because, like any other emotionally repressed Midwesterner, you never know when your emotions are going to explode out and interrupt a good speech. So, yeah. So there I was. I entered the conference center in Houston for the 2016 Gay Christian Network Conference. This was foreign territory for me in that I'd never been to anything like this, and I had no idea how things worked here. I got a red lanyard for my conference ID, which meant that people should ask me before taking my picture for publication purposes. I chose this because I had come to this conference somewhat on the sly. I didn't announce it on Facebook, I didn't tell many of my friends, and I was teaching part-time at a conservative Christian college who would have fired me on the spot if they knew I was at such a conference. The whole weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about how I'd gotten here. I'm an introvert whose natural inclination is to reflect on almost everything that's going on almost continually. So here's where I flash back to my childhood and tell you that I grew up like most kids in any kind of small town in the Midwest, going to church all the time, doing pretty good in school, having a blue-collar dad who tended to be verbally abusive. He wanted me to play football like my other brother, but I didn't even know how the game worked. And though I never did play, I did have a pretty normal childhood. Chicken pox, youth group trips, figuring out what you're really good at in high school, which for me was English and journalism. And I didn't really start recognizing who I was until I got to college. And I was at a conservative Christian college in Chicago when I was first able to admit that I was attracted to guys. And one aspect of college there that confirmed this for me was living on a floor of 30 guys who all had to share one large communal bathroom. So, earlier on, I developed a fear of getting into trouble and had a desire to do everything perfectly during high school. And these approaches to faith were reinforced during my freshman year of college, but this approach changed when I started seriously struggling with depression. This depression came from realizing that I was a legalist and from realizing that legalism couldn't save you. My depression got worse when I started experiencing some cognitive dissonance between what my spiritual life was supposed to be and how it actually was. So I became disillusioned with the evangelical subculture that I was part of, and I also became distrustful of any sort of Christian institution. A kind of evangelical PTSD continued after I graduated, though my cynicism and anger were perpetuated during that time when I became a crime reporter in Chicago. What made things worse was a friend's suicide. And this happened only a few months before that friend was about to graduate from my alma mater. And this was sort of like a double dose of dark night of the soul in a way. So I became pretty quick to question just about everything. But for some reason, the one thing I didn't question was my commitment to fight my same-sex attractions. I'd been to different counselors to help with my depression, but my same-sex attractions, though obviously part of what caused my depression, usually took a back seat. So I fought these attractions faithfully for 15 years. I even became part of a ministry associated with Exodus International while living in Dallas. Though I wasn't forced into trying reparative therapy, I found some amazing community there that really helped me become comfortable in my fight and my stance. Also during that 15 years, I dated 6 women, though each relationship lasted for less and less time. And after the most recent relationship attempt, I became more exasperated with my situation. I also kept remembering so many things that I'd heard and read about same-sex attraction that I'd kind of sidelined over the last 15 years. And this was the start of a process when my thinking and stances on my attractions began to change. Many factors came together during this process, making it difficult to pinpoint if one led to another or if one idea dominoed into another and another. Perhaps the first event in this process came during grad school when I proposed to a pretty huge academic conference and got in. The theme was Rhetoric Across Borders, and the title of my presentation was Calling It Quits, How Exodus International Closing Its Doors Opens Up Rhetorical Possibilities. I'd researched the rhetoric surrounding the ex-gay movement and also researched how former President Alan Chambers' admission of his own same-sex attractions not fully disappearing was a pretty big deal. At the time, though, I knew I wasn't quite on the same page as the conclusion of my presentation, where I added some super liberal, or what I thought at the time were super liberal, conclusions. I argued that one good which had come from this organization shutting down was the creation of more room for gay Christians to identify themselves and more room to, if needed, define themselves in different ways. Little did I know that these conclusions I'd added on were almost exactly where I'd end up at the end of the process of me changing my mind. Friends who are counselors told me in the past that the longer someone has same-sex attractions, the more the wiring in the brain solidifies. This idea, and ideas were quite a big thing for me during grad school because I was studying rhetoric, is what led me to more fully accept that I couldn't change my attractions. I mean, if the president of Exodus International couldn't do it, I don't think I could either. So for a while I considered being gay but celibate. I mean, I'd already pretty much done that for the last 15 years anyway, so why not stick to that and just admit I was gay? And I keep losing my place, sorry. And by admitting I was gay, I would also have to add so many more explanations for what I meant when I said gay. So I realized that I would have to start taking time to explain I'm gay, but not like what you think. So, and another factor that fed on my evangelical PTSD and angst is the idea that maybe Christians had got it wrong on their stance against all things LGBTQ. I mean, there have been a couple times in the past where Christians were wrong about one thing, like the world being flat or slavery and lots of other things too. So I was already distrustful of the church, pastors, and evangelicalism as a whole. And there are times where I felt like doing exactly what evangelicalism said not to do. You can't love the LGBT community? Well, maybe that's what I should do. You can't be gay and Christian? Well, maybe that's what I should be. I mean, more and more respectable evangelicals are coming out in support of LGBTQ people, relationships, and full inclusion in the church. And similar to my contrariness was the role of Søren Kierkegaard's philosophy in my faith. I was first introduced to this Danish philosopher back in undergrad when I started experiencing my first bouts of depression and cognitive dissonance with how my faith was actually playing out. One idea that cemented Kierkegaard a place in my faith was his idea that if you don't get depressed when you're thinking through your faith and the absurdity of life without God, then maybe you're not thinking hard enough. That's my paraphrase. And as dark and depressing as Kierkegaard can be, he was a light and an encouragement for me during my depression. I felt vindicated in my feeling like evangelical expectations weren't meeting up with what I was actually experiencing. And more Kierkegaardian ideas became revelations and integral parts of my new worldview. Ideas like the process of questioning and wrestling and praying with God could be more important than if your conclusions place you outside the majority opinion. And this is because, as Kierkegaard would say, the activity of questioning and wrestling and praying is what makes your faith genuine. And one of the worst sins, Kierkegaard would say, would be to go along unthinkingly and uncritically with the crowd and become part of the mob. And I could talk forever about Kierkegaard, as anybody in my small group would tell you. So, but one way to paraphrase much of his philosophy that's really affected my life would be to say, when it comes to faith, just go ahead and figure it out for yourself. So, and also one of the largest influences or reasons why I decided that I was wrong for fighting my same-sex attractions was fear. This fear started back while I was a kid and afraid of the wrath of my dad. I was afraid of getting yelled at, afraid of doing anything wrong. And this is why I so quickly adopted a legalistic mentality. Maybe if I did everything right, I'd be okay or more worthy of love. And this is why I wrote this out. That same fear is what kept me fighting against my same-sex attractions. Because I was afraid of the inevitable judgment and rejection that would come from coming out. So each of these influences all sort of dogpiled on top of each other. Kierkegaard's ideal of being genuine, not trusting whatever evangelicalism said was true, knowing I couldn't change my orientation. So all of this pushed me to think that maybe I should stop being so afraid. Maybe I should be bold and embrace being gay. Maybe I should sin boldly. I mean, if this put me on the outside of the crowd, then so be it. I was already used to being an outsider, so why not fully embrace this identity and accept whatever consequences came from this decision? So these rhetorical questions became my basis for changing my mind. And since then, I've slowly been coming out to more and more people until this summer when I announced on Facebook that I was in a relationship with another man. And if ever there was a time when I thought I might break the internet, this was probably it. I've been dating this man for 7 months and have fallen in love with him. And in this, I know that God has a huge sense of humor because in spite of my distrust of the church and my wariness to get too involved with any church, my boyfriend is a pastor. And this means that I'm going to be involved with church for the rest of my life. Also during the last year, I approached DCC leadership about starting a group that talks through LGBTQ topics in a way that fits with the church's values and priorities. And the group describes different perspectives without privileging one over the other. And half the time, the group would also be about more people just sharing their own stories and providing that perspective, kind of like tonight. I was still nervous and expecting more rejection when I proposed this, but the leadership said yes. And this group has been amazing over the last year. We've read chapters from many of the books on the resource sheet DCC has put together, giving time to authors who are both open and affirming, and those who are open but not affirming. So there I was. 7 of us from this discussion group traveled to Pittsburgh this year for the Gay Christian Network Conference. And this year, I wore a blue lanyard, which meant I had no issues with anyone taking my picture. I didn't have to worry about a Christian employer finding out that I was at this conference or that I was gay. I even got interviewed on camera about my experiences at the conference that year. And during that interview, I was able to speak without any fear. Thank you.
Well, I just want to start before we enter our time of question and response by saying thank you. I know that all of our stories are sacred, and you guys showed great vulnerability tonight. And so I just so appreciate your willingness to share that with our community. And so just another round of applause for them. Okay, one of the things we did want to make sure we had tonight was a lot of time for all of you to ask questions. Again, part of what our hope was in this 5 weeks of this learning group was for us to continue to learn, to continue to grow in our understanding of the LGBTQ community, how that works, again, absolutely what that means when we read scripture and with where we're headed as a community. But for so many of us who oftentimes just want to make this just strictly a biblical conversation, I think we don't always take the time to understand that and be reminded that this is about a group of people. Right? And we continue each week to just remind ourselves that this is not an issue, that this is about mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and sons and daughters. And so tonight is our opportunity just to continue to get to know these folks a little bit. And so our hope is during this time of question and response that this is not a time tonight specifically to learn more about where DCC is headed, kind of what we're doing. We're not going to delve into all of the Bible verses that deal with homosexuality. Tonight is really a time to continue to get to know our guests that are here. And so we'd love to just have you think now, and hopefully you have been, and kind of as folks have been sharing, of what would you like to know more about these men and women? More about their story, more about who they are, what they've maybe wrestled with or struggled with in their journey, and just be able to ask some questions. And of course, we've given them the opportunity to not respond to any question that may be too vulnerable or something they don't want to, so we will respect their boundaries in that, obviously. And as Michael mentioned earlier, we do have some cards on the chairs around you. You do not have to write down your questions tonight. Dave, Scott, and Landon will kind of be up in these 3 aisles. If you have a question, we'd love for you to just make your way to the end of the aisle. Dave, whoever, Scott, and Landon will just hold the microphone. You can ask your question. But if for some reason we start to get to the end of our time and you haven't gotten your question answered, please write that down on a card. We would love to be able to answer this week. Or specifically if it's a question about where DCC is kind of headed, where we're going, something that we want to talk about another evening, just jot that down and we'll be in touch this week. So, does that sound good? Perfect. So as you guys are kind of thinking, if you have a question, start to make your way to the end of the aisle, and I'm just going to ask our first question to kind of get us started. And so, as you said, as you know, you guys, all of our leadership is not fully in agreement. It's not fully in alignment with how they're thinking about this. And so I just wanted to hear from you, what are differing perspectives that we have? What is helpful or beneficial about having those differing perspectives?
I can address that a little bit. Sure. I think the world needs us as the church to make space for differing opinions and differing feelings and different ideologies. And especially in our political climate right now, somebody has to make space for the other. I think it's always going to be us. Like, we have to find a way to do that. And so I'm grateful for what you're doing, and I know you don't all agree. And if you guys can make progress in this, it means more churches in our country and in our world will be able to have Eric in them and Paula in them and all of us in them. And I just want to say that some people won't be able to stay in your church or come to your church. And that's okay too. Like, there are so many different churches, and the world needs all of the different kinds of churches. I don't think every church is supposed to be like Highlands Church or DCC or any other. So, but the more that we can come together around the full inclusion of all people, including people who disagree with us, the more we will embody the gospel of Jesus Christ, so the world can go, oh, maybe they really do love each other. Maybe they really do love the person who isn't in their community. So I think it's really, really important.
I'm on the board of the Gay Christian Network, and at our conference last year, the Houston conference, we had some people afterwards saying, well, there was a lot of side A, which is supportive of monogamous gay relationships, and there was not so much side B in both workshops and keynote speeches. And we're talking among the board members who are both side A and side B. And one of the side B people said, here's how we feel, and began to explain the frustration with those who've just kind of moved on, which then caused one of our precious board members to say, the way you feel and the way we treated you is how I feel about how my home church treated me. Oh, that's not okay. If we can't make space for you, we're just repeating the same injuries we've all felt before. So we have a strong commitment at GCN to both work with those who believe it's appropriate to have a monogamous gay relationships and those who believe that it's not appropriate to do so. Got to keep the conversations open.
Great. Thank you, guys. Question? Scott, thank you.
I actually have two questions, but one's really fast, I promise. I'm just curious how many churches in Denver approximately are open and accepting? And then the second question's for Jenny, and if it's okay, I'd love to hear just a little bit more about you and your partner's decision to be in a committed monogamous partnership but not get married.
Nobody knows the numbers as far as that goes. Basically, you have two different types of churches that are non-Catholic churches in the United States. You have mainline Protestant churches, which would be your groups like the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the United Methodist Church, Presbyterian Church of the USA, and so on. A lot of those churches are, in fact, supportive of the LGBTQ community, 62% of them, as a matter of fact. When it comes to churches that have an evangelical style of worship, like you have here, 36% of the evangelical population in the United States is supportive of marriage equality, for instance, which is up from 26% just 8 years ago. 51% of those who are millennials are supportive of it. But when it comes to churches within this metro area, or really anywhere in the nation, that have an evangelical expression of faith, as you do, but are also open and affirming, now you get down to like single hand in counting them. There are really just a handful in the region.
So the question about why Christy and I have decided, at least so far, to not get married is you're asking a question that we're wrestling with right now. So I'm just going to share my gut response. And I've been challenged on this in lots of different circles. When we were first together, we couldn't get married. And so that was almost 12 years ago. And yet we felt like we were committed to being in a marriage-like relationship. And then over time, we could get married, and then everybody was allowed to get married. And, there's a side to both of us that's a little bit snarky, like, all of a sudden, the government of my country is going to tell me that I can be married to the person that I'm already committed to. And we both kind of went, yeah, I'm not going to do it, because all of a sudden, the man told us that we could get married. And it's more than that snarkiness. I mean, when I look at the Bible, I don't see any good marriages. Like, I can't name a couple that I feel like that's what we should all be striving for. And the marriage that's referred to in the Old Testament is so absolutely different than the marriage referred to in the New Testament, or that we would have in our culture today. So I guess we have trouble finding great examples of marriage outside of friends that we know and people that we live and do life with. And we're not convinced that being married would do anything to strengthen our commitment to each other, to God, or to the community that we live in. Now, it's just our opinion and where we are. I have a friend in Chicago who pastors Laura Truax pastors a church very much like yours, committed to justice and on the open and affirming end. And she said to me, I wouldn't let you work in my church because you're not married. And she trusts me and loves me. And so there's a lot of different ways to look at this question. And Christy and I just aren't ready to do that. We've also worked out our family relationship in such a way financially that getting married would ruin that for us. We would have to start all over in so many ways in terms of our retirement and what we do with our home and how we own our home. So it's complicated, and we marry people in our church happily. And I have married gay couples and feel very supportive of that. For Christy and I, it doesn't work for us yet.
Thanks for sharing. Just one reminder as you come up and ask questions, just if you want to direct it to a certain person, the names on the screen from top to bottom are how folks are sitting up here left to right. So just so you know. All right.
Hi. For my husband and I, so much of, I think, why we're here and wanting to explore conversations like this and other types of inclusive conversations is to help our kids be loving and inclusive followers of Jesus. And for now, they're really tiny, so we know it's a lot more about modeling and our behavior and the types of relationships we're building. But, I mean, our 4-year-old already asks so many questions, and so I know that that's only going to continue. And I'm hoping that any of you that have kids or close relationships with kids, or even if you can speak to the ways that you grow and encourage the kids in your children's ministry at Highlands around this topic, that would be really encouraging.
This is a hard question, I think. I'm not sure I have a great answer to that. I think that I have a story that recently happened that I think is really painful, that's sort of the opposite of that happening. And I wish I don't know what I could do differently, but my wife and I have some neighbors who are a lesbian couple with 2 kids that are about the same age as our kids, and we developed a relationship with them for 2 years, and they found out my story and where I work and our church's sort of position, and cut off. Like the door slammed in our face, and it hurts. And I don't know what we could have done differently. I think we knew from the beginning, if they knew, the door's never going to be open to begin with. And so we probably waited too long for that to come out. And so I don't know where the balance is, but it's really hard to see our neighbors across the street that we can't talk to anymore. And I hope that changes. I mean, it's still pretty fresh. So I would appreciate prayer about that, because, I mean, one of the reasons we wanted to be in relationship with them is because we want our kids to be exposed to people different than we are. And, you know, I think that really just speaks to how hard this is. And they're not, at least as far as I know, identifying as Christian. But that same dynamic can happen sitting next to somebody in church, and it's just, I think it's just really hard to move forward. I think it's hard to take this position, or it's hard to try to be a community where everybody's voice is welcome, because sometimes you get to these places where it does feel like the beliefs are so different, and I hope that DCC and Highlands and other churches, mine, can find a way forward with that, because it's hard. It's just very hard.
On transgender issues, we know that children under 6 years of age, it takes them about 15 seconds to make the adjustment. I have 5 granddaughters between 9 and 6. I mean, it was just nothing. It was just nothing to them. Over age 6, and now we start needing a little more conversation with them that needs to be a little bit more complicated. Once they get to their teen years, in today's world, they tend to be very, very accepting. But yeah, with little ones, it's if the issue is transgender, it's just so easy.
And I would say, in our church, we have maybe 100 to 150 kids or so, and about half of them are probably living in families where they have 2 moms or 2 dads, and the other half are in families where they have a mom and a dad or a single parent. And it's hardly even anything that we have to talk about, because the kids are just used to it. They don't, they see 2 women holding hands when they walk into church, and they don't even have a reaction at all. Or they have friends who have 2 dads, and they call them both dad, or they have different names. It's so easy with our kids, and I think it's because the adults are comfortable with it. So we have commitments in our church to help create space where our kids can ask lots of questions and any questions they want. And I don't know, it just has been so easy with our children. And our children's, we don't call her a children's pastor, her title is Children's and Family Soul Care Pastor. And she's straight, she's married to a man, she has 2 beautiful girls, and they're just a part of the mix. So we're at a weird advantage because we've always been this way. So kids that come here might take a second look at first to 2 men holding hands, and then they're like, oh, it's 2 dads. Okay, on to the next thing. So I'd love to put you in touch with her, with our children's soul care pastor, if you'd want to talk about it more with her. Yeah.
I just wanted to say thanks for creating space for both sides of this dialogue. I'm a side A gay Christian, but I have a very similar history to you, Eric. And it was, I used to work for Exodus International and was a part of trying to change my orientation for 12 years. And now I'm very out. I'm getting married this summer to a man. But it's been interesting because I'm really invested in the dialogue across belief lines, like with people that I don't agree with. And I think it's awesome that you're creating this space. But I wanted to ask you, Roger and Scott, the question of, as the narrative, the kind of national narrative has begun to move away from your position, how has that been challenging? And in what ways can those of us who are on the side A side actually create space for those of you that we disagree with and that you disagree with us?
That's like an easy question.
Super
Let me just
easy.
answer that.
Yeah. Scott, jump in.
No, I think, it's been interesting being part of this ministry for several decades and going through just really seismological shifts in our culture, and I think that's why, sort of watching Exodus fade away and other ministries sort of coming up, and GCN, has grown a lot. So watching those developments has just been always trying to keep up with what's happening, and I think that's why I've appreciated at least the environment that I sort of grew up in, was just the idea that there's a lot of freedom and space sort of for, like I said, I think we have that friend group because we've had that freedom to really disagree, for people to have the freedom to make choices, to find their way and have their journeys and to respect those journeys. And like I said, we have some tough conversations, but we fight for those relationships. So I do think, like I said, as things are changing, there is the church that is really trying to hold on to their traditional sexual ethic, and they really, some churches don't, but I think a lot more and more churches are wanting to know how to love the LGBTQ community. They want to know how to. When I talk to pastors, they say, "Oh, I do have gay people in my congregation," and I'm like, "Why?" I'm very curious about that because, when there are gay affirming churches, like the numbers that you gave, and especially like say on Capitol Hill, there's a lot of open and gay affirming churches. There's churches like Highlands and DCC. Why would someone kind of go to your church? I would love to know what that story is. Do they find comfort in being, I grew up Presbyterian, so I'm just sort of finding a Presbyterian church, or are they someone that is conflicted about that? Or, what's those stories? And to find out those stories as soon as you possibly can so that you can really not do a bait and switch, like, oh, you're welcome here, and then, oh, you know what, so have those conversations sooner than later to let people know sort of what their expectations are. And so I know that, at least for our ministry, it's like there are churches that are wanting to know how to love LGBTQ people, and we have an opportunity to go into these churches and to really talk about that, and just to perhaps show some models of how you can really genuinely love someone and still hold that traditional perspective. Did you want to say anything, Raj?
I guess the thoughts that come to my mind in that, how can we kind of reach across that divide? I think, I have yet to meet, and I know there are some, but I don't meet them very often anyway, gay people who have accepted that haven't felt conflicted at some point. So I think part of what makes it complicated when you move to a place of self-acceptance is it's really hard to look back because it's painful, and not like everything's hunky-dory just because you decide you're accepting that as an okay thing, but it's painful to reach across that divide. And part of empathy is kind of putting yourself in somebody's shoes, which means you might feel some of that old stuff again. And and the reverse is true. Someone who's committed to the course that I've taken to talk to someone who's happily gay, married, seems to be at peace with that. It causes me to question some things that maybe in that moment I'm not wanting to look at too. So I just think it's a constant thing, and honestly, we just get tired of that after a while. It's hard to be. It's just hard to be in that place, and at some point, you just kind of want to move on, and this is the direction I've chosen. I just want to live my life out this way. So I think it's hard. We just have to be committed to reaching across that and being willing to feel some stuff that maybe is a little uncomfortable or challenging.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me speak toward why DCC has gone this direction a little bit. There's a temptation. So, there was an election in November, pretty divisive. And I know and love people, I'm related to people that voted for Donald Trump. They're loving. They love me well. They love my kids well, my wife well. And it's really disheartening to hear people say, if you voted for Donald Trump, you're a xenophobe, you're a racist, because I know those people, and they're not those things. I can't explain why they voted for him, quite honestly, but they're not those things. And yet, this is what we do. And I also am related to people and know people and love people who love me well and my family well that have voted for Hillary Clinton. And they're not interested in ripping babies out of women's wombs. And so what quickly happens in disagreements is disagreement becomes a threat because we root so much of our identity in the wrong place. The Jewish people have a saying, judge favorably. And so when you meet somebody, just assume they may actually want the same thing you do. And what we often do is we demonize the other so quickly. And so one of my deepest longings is just for people to be able to look at someone who votes different, looks different, acts different, has a different sexual orientation to believe maybe we want the same thing here. And so the reason at DCC we're committed to working toward that is because I serve with about 30 men and women in leadership that I know to be loving and vulnerable and caring, and they don't all agree. We don't all agree, but we want the same thing. And so I think the first step in conversation, whether you're side A, side B, gay, straight, transgender, queer, is to actually look at someone who's different and say, I'm going to judge you favorably. I'm going to believe the best about you until you give me a reason not to. And I believe if we start with that first step of love and trust, which you're going to get burned, by the way, and hurt and punched, and it's going to hurt, but I would rather walk away with myself being bruised than doing damage to other people. And I think that's the first step in any conversation across an aisle, and that's why we've done it here at DCC.
Sure. So I don't have a question. I wanted to be one voice, and I think probably all voices. Our leadership has thanked you, but from the congregation, just wanted to say thank you to all 5 of you for coming out and being willing to be vulnerable, especially with the questions that you weren't necessarily expecting and that sort of thing. But Scotty, I've known you for 10 years, and I just wanted to tell you, yep, that's me. Just wanted to tell you that I love you, man.
No? Hello? Hi. I was wondering, Eric, if the group is still going to be meeting after this discussion is over, and do you have to be a member, and also do you have to be LGBTQ to go to the group?
The group will keep going after this 5-week session is over, and I think we'll talk more about it that last week when I think we're going to be talking about what's next. And you don't have to identify as LGBTQ to be part of the group. You can be an ally, you can be side B, you can disagree and still come because the group's open for everybody. And just like DCC, we value different perspectives in that conversation, in that space to have that conversation. And yeah.
Just a quick clarification. Some of us haven't been here for all discussions. Side A and side B may not be a familiar reference point. So, Eric, do you mind just giving us a quick?
Or Paul.
I'll put you on the spot.
Or Paul.
Yeah, I guess one way to think about it would be side A. If side A would be more like a church is open and affirming of LGBT relationships and inclusion and same-sex marriage and having LGBTQ people as on leadership. And side B, which I think could be also considered open but not affirming, where LGBTQ people are welcome in the church, but and I'm not as up on all the this perspective, so if I get it wrong, feel free to correct me. But you sometimes can't be on leadership. They won't have same-sex marriages, and sometimes are expected to remain celibate. Does that sound right?
Paula, anything you'd add to that definition?
I think the only clarification there might be that I think leadership is acceptable in side B churches if you are not sexually active. I think that would be the only thing that would be different about that.
I would like to encourage you to ask questions of Paula. Like, we have her in our church every week. She's a member, and your curiosity about transgender, this is like a real unique opportunity. She's not afraid of questions, and if you ask something that she doesn't want to answer, she'll just tell you. But most of us don't know transgender people. She's the first friend and colleague and sister, that I have who is transgender. And so I just want to encourage you, she won't be uncomfortable. You probably do feel uncomfortable, that's okay. But her journey is so beautiful and so full of God moments. I just want to encourage you, you still have some time, ask her some questions.
There's only one question I don't answer, just one. So you just have to figure out what that one question is.
what that question is.
That's the challenge.
I'll tell you what that question is. Those of us who are transgender generally will not answer questions about surgery. There are usually anywhere between 2 and 4 surgeries that are done. But if you're a person who does not have financial means, you can't afford to do any of them. And so for those of us who can afford to have whatever surgeries we like, it's just not appropriate for our financial capacity to cause us to proudly say what we've done when someone else may not be able to do it at all. So that's the one question none of us like to be asked. Pretty much anything else is okay to ask, and we actually will give you an answer, and it's fine to misgender us too. People misgender us all the time. It's not a problem. I misgender myself occasionally.
Landon.
There we go. Thank you, Jenny, for your encouragement, because I did have a question for Paula, but I was hesitant because I don't want it to come across as offensive. But it's something that, as somebody who believes in God as perfect and infallible, I've often wondered how do you, when you are born a male or a female, and yet as you grow, you feel different than what you were born as? Are you saying that God made a mistake? And how do you decide to undo what, quote unquote, God has done? And then I guess the other question I had for you personally is, when you did come to the decision that you wanted to be transgender, and you were a Christian male with a family and a wife, how did they handle your decision? And how did you approach that?
There are, in fact, not just males and females. There are 42 different intersex conditions that exist that have been identified. So we're not, in fact, born male and female. So when people say Genesis 1:27 says male and female, he created them, the truth is that that's not so. For instance, we know that pre-hormonal transgender people, before they have hormones, because we know the hormones change the brain structure, but pre-hormonal transgender people, whether male to female or female to male, have brains that operate about halfway in between males and females. So they really are not fully one or fully the other. So the issue is that, in fact, there are lots of things that have happened in the world that we wouldn't necessarily ask for. But do we treat them? If a child is born with a club foot or a cleft palate, do we treat that? Or do we consider that that's something that God intended? And I think when we have the capacity to treat them, we treat them. When it comes to family stuff, it is the hardest thing. It's the toughest one. I would not wish this diagnosis on anyone, so I did not decide to become transgender. I just am. To show you how much it's not a diagnosis that you want, it has the highest incidence of suicide attempt. It's a 41% suicide attempt rate, which is 6 times higher than any other diagnosis in the DSM-5. So it's not something any of us have asked for or decided. It's just the way we are and the way in which we're born. But the hardest thing, the reason I wanted to make it through my entire life, was it is never okay for your family. It's just never okay. Your children lose their father. My kids are all grown. My son is senior pastor of a church that's about the size of our church, Highlands Church in Denver. He's in New York City. It was extremely difficult for him. He lost his dad. For my girls, it was a little bit easier, but they had their own grieving to go through. For my wife, it was extremely difficult because it's not what she signed up for. It's not something I told her before we married. I told her about 6 months after, because I thought marriage would cure it. It didn't. But she's known about it all along, and she's very, very supportive of me. But we do no longer consider ourselves to be husband and wife. We no longer consider ourselves to be married. And it's the part that's just not ever okay. I say to trans folks that I talk with a lot, if you can make it through without doing it, it's just going to be terrible for your family. And I often say to transgender people, it will be more difficult for your family than you imagine. And you might imagine it being extremely difficult. I'm telling you, it's going to be worse more difficult than you imagine. My son and I speak often on the subject. And actually, you can watch a presentation we made. It's on my blog, there's a connection to it, or the Open network also, I think, has a connection to it. And you can get it from his perspective. It's pretty raw. It's pretty raw. We're an open and honest family, but it's not easy. Did that answer your question on both counts? Okay, thanks.
Dave.
Hi, I have a question for you too, Paula. I have a cousin who is 15 years old and has known that his gender has been different than the way he was born since he was probably 4. And he's growing up in the Deep South with a very conservative family. And his mom, though, who has primary custody, is becoming really supportive. But I'm curious, I know for him, obviously it's a big struggle. And he's homeschooled and isolated and really struggling. And then for my aunt, she's also in the Deep South and struggling with her children rejecting this too. So do you have any resources or places that you would guide a family who's going through this with a teenager in a way that would, just offer, I guess, sort of any hope at all and help?
Yes, there are actually a number of resources, but one of the best for that one is the Gender Conference. There's Gender Conference East, Gender Conference West, and that's a resource for families with transgender children. I spoke at the East Conference this past year, like 400 kids and their parents. They have 2 days. They have 1 day for the families, 1 day for healthcare professionals, and they have a boatload of resources. The Gay Christian Network, GCN.net, also has a lot of resources on the subject. It gets complicated when you're talking with children. There's unfortunately information out there that says 80% of children who present as transgender will eventually not be identifying as transgender. That's actually a pretty bogus study. It's a study that was done a number of years ago, and these were not children who self-identified as transgender. Their physicians, their pediatricians, their psychiatrists, their parents said that they did not behave in a way that was typical for children of that gender. Well, actually, 80% of those kids are not transgender. So when it came to that conclusion, there was no question. If you have a child who consistently, persistently says that they feel misgendered, then that is something to take very seriously. On the other hand, there's a statistic that just came out. A huge study was released on December 8th that was done in 2015 of 27,000 of us who are trans. And of those who present as gender non-binary, 85% of those are between 18 and 24 years of age, which for those of us who, my doctorate's in pastoral counseling, so for those of us who work with adolescents, you start asking questions too sometimes. What if this is maturational and what if this is gender? Oh my goodness, this is not easy. It's really difficult to discern. It's why most therapists actually should be referring to specialists on this subject.
Thank you.
I've got a quick question, and I know Mary has one as well. I've noticed a lot that in the last 10 or 15 years, the conversation within Christianity and evangelical Christianity specifically has radically changed. I've noticed in the last couple of years, institutions like Wheaton College and Christianity Today themselves employ folks who would identify as gay but are in celibate relationships. And so it seems to me 15 years ago we were asking questions, are you born with it? Is this nature, nurture? I would love to hear your perspectives on why that, if I'm right or wrong on that, and what you might attribute that to, that change.
I think that you're right about the change. I worked in Youth for Christ for 25 years during the time when I was trying to get healed. And the conversation then was just the way you described it. Like, is it nurture or is it nature? And meaning, are you born with it or do you become gay because you expose yourself to gay things, whatever that is? And you don't hear that conversation anymore, not even in fundamentalist churches. Like, it's really shifted a lot. I don't really know why. I know on the evangelical side, 20 years ago, there were only books written by evangelicals that addressed how to deal with same-sex attraction, how to get healed, everything from healing prayer to theological books. And it's only been in the last 20 years, I think, Paula may know better about this than I do, that evangelicals have started to shift their hermeneutic and their theological understanding of the 7 or so sentences in the Bible that seem to say, this is sin, this is an abomination. So there's a lot more literature now on the side of evangelicalism that would say, we might have been wrong about about the lens through which we read those 7 sentences. So I think that's happened, partly because evangelicals are always trying to go deeper into the scriptures and deeper into theology. So we're doing better work, I think. And the more that's written about it, like for me, before going to Fuller Seminary, I had only read the Exodus side of things. And so I was convinced that I should get healed. When I went to seminary, a whole new world opened because all of a sudden there were evangelicals that were saying, there might be another way to read those passages and still be faithful to the text.
I would just add to that gay people have a way of not being ignored. And honestly, I think that's a big part of what is happening is, I mean, for many years, everybody had to pretend, and I think it's a sign of a broader move towards more just transparency in general within Christianity of like, it's okay to talk about real stuff. And, I think we have a long way to go in that, but I think that's part of the equation too.
And I would agree with that too, like growing up, through the 70s and 80s and 90s and, the LGBTQ community at that time there was the real big push of I was born this way, which I think is why the evangelical kind of went to the environmental place, that it's must be something going on in your environment. And I think that, probably what's happened was with the idea that there's probably, it's probably just a huge mixture of both of those things. And as you can kind of see this through even just our 5 stories, that there's a lot of similarities, but it's just such a complex thing as far as how someone navigates their sexuality and their faith and the biological and gender identity. And I mean, it's just a hugely complex thing. And that's why you're seeing just, I think that's why I just thought about what does pastoral care look like as people are landing on this spectrum, how they are very personally navigating that. How do you care for those people? And that's really more the conversation as opposed to trying to find out. I think that's a genuine need for when people are struggling with this. They probably do need to take some seasons to figure out, like, why is this in my life? And to go through that. And then eventually, I think all of us get to a place where it's like, well, I don't know if we'll ever really know, or maybe I just have my own personal thing about why I think that is, and just sort of moving on with life. And but it's just such a complex, it's probably a lot of both of those things,
We have a question here.
I get the sense a lot, or feel that when we talk about the LGBTQ community, it quickly kind of migrates to talks about same-sex attraction, and we kind of neglect the transgender discussions. So, Paul, I just want to hear if there's anything that, any other ways that we can make sure that we're being inclusive of the trans community as well.
The most important thing is not to be frightened of us and not to be afraid you're going to do something or say something wrong. There are a lot of resources. Denver's a good place to live if you happen to be transgender. The Gender Identity Center of Colorado is excellent. There are a lot of other resources available here. And we can speak for ourselves, but you know what we need more than anything else? We need allies. We need people who can say the things we can't say. Really, we just kind of need people who will say, oh, I know somebody who's trans and they're actually pretty normal. Well, as relatively normal as any of us are. We are a smaller part of the population, 0.3%. Interestingly, a lot of evangelical churches were pretty accepting of transgender people until marriage equality happened. And then this cultural shift occurred. So the next battleground became transgender issues. And all of a sudden, churches that had been accepting of transgender people became no longer accepting of them. So just saying hi, interacting, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Most of us are more than willing to tell our stories, and there are lots of complexities about it, and people are happy to talk about that. But thanks for caring.
This is kind of similar to that question, but just hearing the discussion of side A and side B seems to be a little bit more clear with the sexual orientation. So I'm just kind of interested in where transgender kind of falls into side A and to side B, and how that kind of goes into, clarify that a little bit.
There's not a single passage anywhere in the Bible that talks about transgender issues. There are passages that talk about cross-dressing, but they're Old Testament passages, and if you take that one law, you got to take the other 612. So the truth is, Scripture just doesn't say anything on the subject. So if you're going to say something, you're going to have to extrapolate out something from Scripture, and that's where most people who are opposed to us will take Genesis 1:27, which would be fine, except it's not true. It's verifiably not true. So there really hasn't been that much of a backlash against us, because Scripture is silent on the subject within the evangelical community until of late. And it's my personal opinion on that is because pretty much all of our questions, when the day's done, are not so much questions about books and chapters, verses. They're questions that are, when the day's done, more socially based questions. They're tribal questions.
Did.
Makes me nervous. This is kind of a comment from my age perspective as well, but it seems like earlier in my Christian faith, everything was very theologically based, and I ignored mental health completely. It wasn't even a category. And what I hear so completely integrated in your conversations is theology and mental health going together. So it's kind of a comment, but I just want to say I love and solicit your continuing to talk about your own mental health journey, and I love how it's folded into creation of healthy identity and those kind of things, instead of this kind of strange separation between theology and mental health. And so I just invite you to continue to talk about your mental health journey in that awesome way.
I did not answer one of your questions. Transgender people, when it comes to side A, side B specifically, 70% of transgender males to female, so transgender women, me, 70% of us are attracted to women, 30% are attracted to men. Transgender male to female, transgender female to male, transgender men, generally we're always attracted to females. It's two very different experiences. Your gender identity and your sexual identity are two completely different things. Your sexual identity is who you want to go to bed with. Your gender identity is who you want to go to bed as. Sorry, I didn't answer that question earlier.
I think I would like to say something about the mental health piece, because I think that the gospel is this holistic package that theology is a very important part of. Theology is how we understand God, and the Bible is a huge part of that, and how we relate socially is a really big part of that. But for me, my own mental health was a part of what drove me to this, because I felt so split inside for so much of my life. Since I was 16 years old, I felt like God was calling me to preach the gospel. I didn't know what that would look like, but I would see my friends at 16 who didn't go to church, and I would look at them and I would think, I wonder if they know how much God loves them. Well, if they don't, maybe I could help them. And I'm still that 16-year-old kid having that feeling and calling. And at the same time, at 16, I thought, I like girls. Like, I want to kiss a girl, not a boy. And there's such a split between all of that. And that split emotionally grew and grew and grew and grew and had an adverse effect on all of me. So on my spiritual life, my theological life, everything. And when I finally realized that I might have been asking God the wrong question to heal me from some deep brokenness in me, but rather I was asking God to make me whole and make me who God made me to be, all of a sudden the split started to heal. And, God's lifelong request of me to stop lying is how I understood that split. And that was about emotional life. I was so afraid of being rejected by the church, by employers, by my family, by my friends. And the fear of that rejection weighed so heavily on my psyche that I lived two different lives. I was in ministry, preaching the gospel and inviting people into a relationship with God. And I was trying to stay out of sexual relationships with women because it was a sin. And when it finally came together, and I just feel like a whole person. And I think that's what the gospel calls us all to be whole people in a world that we learn to love and embrace as the image of God in this world. So it's the mental health, the psychological side of this is really important. And if we can help our kids, our teenagers, grow up learning how to talk about this and not lie about it, oh gosh, it means wholeness, gospel wholeness for us. So thank you for asking that question.
Okay, we're going to do one final question. Landon. You can Rochambeau for it.
I just had a clarifying question for Paula. In the statement of Genesis 1:27, where it says God made male and female, and you're saying that's incorrect, I was just wondering if you're defining that pre or post-fall, and because if you're defining it pre-fall, then wouldn't that mean that God specifically chose to make them male and female, but then post-fall, with that came the variety of genders? Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. It's a common question. And when it comes to theology of the fall, your theology is probably not the same as my theology on that subject. So I'll choose not to address that part of it because I think that's a theological question. I will answer the part of it that is, I think, more practically based, which is we know we're seeing a higher incidence of transgender issues, even when you remove all the issues of social acceptability or not acceptability. Why do we see more now than existed 100 years ago? And I think we are seeing environmental changes that are occurring because of the way we're treating the earth. For instance, I know in my case, it's because of a drug that was later banned for lots and lots of negative perspectives. So that would, in fact, if you had a more typical evangelical or Calvinistic fall theology, then you would see all of that as a result of the fall. And if I had that position, I would say it's a post-fall issue, but that is in fact not my theology.
Sure. Yeah, Jen. I just want to address that really quickly. I think that Genesis 1:27 is far more nuanced than we ever thought. But I think that about the whole Bible. So I'm not quite sure that I would say it's not true. I would say the truth of it is more nuanced, and we have to explore those nuances. So I disagree with you sometimes.
Well, can we just say thank you, another round of applause for all of our guests tonight. And thank you for your questions. Honestly, I think if you remember last week in talking about our interpretive grid, one of the things that we do have that factors in as we think about kind of how we function as a faith community is experience. And there's so many of us that don't have experience with the LGBTQ community in a lot of ways. And so we wanted to at least give a taste of that tonight. And our hope is that you saw one of the themes in this is relationship, right? It takes relationship for us to disagree and move forward together. It takes relationship for us to actually understand somebody that's different than we are. And so my hope is for all of us is that as we continue to move forward, we don't let this just be something that's academic, but we let this be something that's relational as well. I think that's vitally important and central as we think about a group of people, again, not an issue. And so we want to make sure we get to all of your questions. And so if you did not have a chance to ask your question tonight, please go ahead and fill out the card that's on the seat around you. Make sure you put your name and email address. And again, we'll be in touch over the next week. And we heard that it's getting slippery out there. So drive safe home as you go. Dave's going to come and close us now.
Yeah, I have the gift of dismissing you all with a blessing. And so can we all agree we were in sacred space together tonight? The conversation of compassion, empathy, and really seeing one another, listening to one another. And so what a gift to do that together. And so let's go with this blessing. My friends, may we love our neighbors as ourselves in order that we might see God in the marginalized, oppressed, condemned, and forgotten, and embrace all people with God's true compassion. Peace be with you all.